From being one of the most outspoken drivers on the grid to maybe being banned exactly because of that, Lewis Hamilton's future in F1 might be at stake. That's because the FIA has come up with a new, horrible rule that drivers must get their political statements approved before they make them by the FIA. They did this so they don't offend certain countries where Grand Prix are held, such as Qatar. Now, I'll get to the rule and why it's problematic and how it might change later in the video. For now, what you need to know is that Lewis Hamilton has claimed that nothing will stop him from speaking out. These rules won't do anything because the guy is still going to make political, religious, and personal statements regardless of the FIA's consent. The 7-time world champion was speaking at the launch of the Mercedes 2023 car when he let everyone know that he was not impressed by the new rules, because these new rules by the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, also known as the FIA, are truly barbaric. Will Buxton even disliked these rules, which prompted Twitter users to say things like, "You know you've got a problem when Will Buxton is criticizing you," referring to his clear positive bias toward the FIA. Hamilton, however, is treating these rules as optional. He's claiming that he's not afraid of the consequences at all. Here, take a look at what the 103-time Grand Prix winner stated. "Nothing will stop me from speaking on the things I am passionate about." He also said, "The sport has a responsibility to speak out and create awareness on important topics, particularly as we are traveling to different places, so nothing changes." Because here's the thing, the FIA updated its international sporting code, and it banned the display of personal, religious, and political statements. Well, they didn't exactly ban them, but the drivers will need written approval from the FIA before making them. The problem with that is that this rule infringes on the driver's right to freedom of speech. Because of course, the FIA won't let you make pro-LGBTQI+ statements in Middle Eastern countries like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And if you're a driver who doesn't comply, well, you're in tough luck because you'll be given a financial penalty. This is okay, right? Because Hamilton can very clearly afford that. But what's not okay is that drivers will also be hit with a sporting penalty. So maybe Hamilton might end up 10 places behind on the grid just because he said something the FIA didn't like. Because look, Hamilton has been an activist since the start of his career, and he's not going to stop anytime soon, that's for sure. He has regularly used his platform to raise awareness for human rights issues all over the globe. For example, at the 2020 Tuscan Grand Prix, Hamilton wore a t-shirt with the words, "Arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor" on it. Then he also raced in the Middle East with a rainbow helmet to criticize Qatar for its horrible treatment of the LGBTQI+ community. He's also constantly talked about how the sport needs to raise more awareness about human rights abuses all around the world. The 38-year-old GOAT did mention that he doesn't want any penalty points for speaking out, since that won't be an ideal situation. But whether he wants penalty points or not is beyond the point, because for him what matters most is his ability to speak out.
For sure, the most difficult thing is keeping your goal and your eyes set on that and not being distracted, not giving up. I think the easiest thing in life is to give up on whatever you're focused on.
Which he stated that he will do. Hamilton assured his fans that he's still going to be speaking my mind, since there are a lot of things he needs to tackle. The situation isn't all that bad though, and Hamilton acknowledged that. Lewis talked about how the support of the Formula One CEO, Stefano Domenicali, has been amazing and refreshing. He stated that all the drivers are aligned on freedom of speech, and that the CEO does support that. It's just a little complicated, right? Because the sport is trying to become this massive global phenomenon, and it's trying to expand into other regions. At the same time, the Grand Prix in the Middle East has become an important part of the F1 calendar. So while freedom of speech is extremely important, the sport also can't afford to make these countries furious. The CEO of F1 is stuck between a rock and a hard place. But still, that doesn't mean you just can't let the drivers speak their mind. In the words of George Russell, that's all a bit silly, isn't it? The reason why Russell kinda matters in all of this is because because he's the director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, an association that represents the Formula One drivers. He's extremely critical of everything that's going on, and in fact, he was quite hopeful that this problem would be resolved before the start of the 2023 season, which didn't happen. Russell even claimed that he's not sure why the FIA would even take a stance like this. He even assured the fans of the sport that the drivers aren't going to limit their views because of some silly regulations, and that this rule isn't necessary. This rule garnered so much hate, and it was such a PR nightmare for the FIA that they made some changes to it.
I think for all of us, we always miss driving, so the break initially feels too short, and then when you get towards the end of it, you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, get back into the action. So, but I definitely maximized and enjoyed it.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Great to hear, yeah.
Recently, the governing body for Formula One clarified the whole rule about drivers not being able to speak out on political and controversial issues. So the political ban from the FIA meant that political, religious, and personal statements without consent from the organization would be barred. At the same time, the FIA didn't even talk about the limitations of its law. No driver knew to what extent it'll be enforced, and it was quite frightening. And because of this, drivers were unanimously against the whole thing, especially Lewis Hamilton, of course. He straight up said he won't follow the ban, as you know from the video. So this kind of pressured the FIA to make some changes to how they do things. They issued guidance that puts limits on when the FIA can apply the rules. The restrictions will only be upheld during pre- and post-race events and on the track. Now there's a small problem with that. Remember Lewis's helmet? That's on track. So the FIA could stop him from wearing that. Even if he decides to wear a t-shirt representing some sort of activism, he could be banned from that too, given that this happens during the events around the race. But there's a silver lining. Although it's not the best way to do things, the silver lining is that the drivers can still express their views before and after the race. It just has to happen in their own space, outside Formula One. So it's not like the FIA can limit speech on social media, and neither can it limit free speech during interviews. The best bit is, drivers can say whatever the heck they want during the FIA press conference. But there's a catch. That can only happen in response to direct questions from journalists. So if a journalist asks, "Hey Lewis, do you condemn the lack of human rights in Qatar?" he can 100% criticize the country, but he can't criticize it out of thin air.
Where did you get the courage to speak up about you being the only one in the room? Where did you get that courage from?
I think partly it's ingrained in who I am. I've never been really good at adhering to kind of rules.
Plus, the FIA will allow exceptional circumstances in which the driver could potentially be allowed to make a political statement at an arena where it might otherwise not be allowed. But for that, a request needs to be submitted to the governing body a month before an event. But will Lewis Hamilton do that? Probably not. And that, folks, is all on why Lewis Hamilton's F1 future might be at stake because of his activism.